Hello and welcome to Chapter 19, the last chapter we'll be covering here. What I'd like to do is actually start you at the back of the chapter and then we'll go to the front real quick. But over on page 336, we start talking about the key points in the chapter. Point 1 is incredibly important. You've got to remember one thing. When it comes to advertising, and we're going to talk about advertising here in a couple of minutes. Advertising such as newspaper, which is your bread and butter, you got TV, which is costly, magazines, depending on what region you hit. But again, advertising is expensive, but it's also not three-dimensional. You've got to remember one thing about visual merchandising. When you're doing a display up, remember you're talking three-dimensional, which is always a huge benefit. So key point number 1 says the 3 dimensions of visual merchandising makes it an excellent tool for accurately presenting the merchandise to the consumer. 3 dimensions is very important. But also keep in mind at the same time that organizations are probably going to throw tons and tons of money at advertising and minuscule amounts of money at the displays. Now your big boys like Macy's, of course, they'll put money toward their displays. But Fred's down here at the corner, these other places, they'll put very little money into the actual displays. Alright, let's jump over to page 320. Sorry about that, got off topic a little bit about Fred's. Don't know how that came up. Visual merchandising is intended to capture the attention of those who frequent brick and mortar operations with the hope of transforming their curiosity into a purchase. Remember back to the very first day we even did this stuff. Turn that shopper into a purchaser. Make that customer open that pocketbook, pull out that credit card. That's what it's all about. Basically, that is your job as a visual merchandiser. 321, we start talking about unlike television commercial, which is used sparingly in retailing by comparison to all other advertising media, print and radio generate little excitement. Are you hearing what this is saying? Print and radio generate little excitement. Now keep that in mind as we turn the page and talk about newspapers. We start talking about advertising over on page 322. The first thing they talk about is the media. They talk about newspapers. Guys, you can tell me what you want to, but newspapers are still the lifeblood of this thing. TV's great and radio's great. The newspaper is still your bread and butter, guys. Okay? Lead time, it talks about the cost. Although the cost of advertising in newspapers is increasing, it still doesn't match TV or magazines even for that point. Market appeal talks about the life of advertisement. Then over on page 323 we talk about magazines. It is the magazine that brings high quality print reproduction to the retailer. Whether black and white or produced in 4-color format, ads and magazines generally provide a greater degree of clarity than their print counterpart, the newspaper. So, is there time and a place for magazine ads? Certainly. But remember, newspapers are your bread and butter. And then it talks about life potential, broad distribution, quality, and then at the bottom of page 324, remember, we're still talking about magazines. They talk about regional editions of most magazines available for more restricted distribution. If you can target a specific region, wouldn't that be better than doing a national thing? If you're only located, for example, east of the Mississippi, why do a national presentation if all your stores are east of the Mississippi? So keep the regional magazines in mind. And guys, those of you that shared a classroom with me before understand that we talk about costs a lot. But again, when you're dealing with advertising, now remember we're talking about advertising, not necessarily the visual merchandising displays. It's hard to generate excitement about that because you're going to go to your CEO and say, I need $250,000 for an advertising campaign. First thing your CEO is going to say is, well, what's my return on investment? And you're going to say, well, we hope it will be. Now, if you're the CEO, are you going to invest $250,000 on I hope it will be? Because you really know how good an advertising campaign is going to make it. So you always have to think about cost. 325, we start talking about direct mail. Now the good thing about direct mail is that the mailing lists are easy to come by. You can do, as customers are coming through doing their credit cards and their checks, you can get their information, which makes it quick and easy. You can always go buy mailing list if you want to. So direct mailings are usually pretty good. You got lower distribution costs, of course, with direct mailings. But what's the problem with direct mailings? Some people call them junk mail. For example, on Tuesday afternoons, I go to my mailbox, and it's every Tuesday. I pull out my mail, and unless there's a couple envelopes on top, everything else goes right into the recycle bin. I don't even look at it. Unless there's a bill, which there usually is, I don't look at the junk mail. And that's coming from me, a guy that has absolutely no money. Now you've got to remember the snail mail, the slow delivery. You've got to remember it's just that. It's slow. But you have to remember it's low cost. So that's something to remember. Alright, on page 326, there it is. Television. Live action. You can get widespread market potential. There's no other medium out there that can get your message out quicker than television. But again, we were talking about cost, so remember, you're paying for that. Is there going to be a good return on that investment? And it goes on, just below that, it talks about cost, lead time, and then, I'm still on page 326, about 3/4 of the way down. It talks about bypassing the commercial. We're talking about your TiVos, your DVRs, where you can fast forward through a commercial. And don't tell me some of you don't do that, because I do it. What does that do to the retailers? If you're allowed to fast forward through my commercial, that commercial that I spent $3 million making, and you're going to fast forward through it, where's my return on that investment? So, as a retailer, as a advertiser, are you in favor or against TiVos and DVRs? Something to think about. Down on page 326 again still, we talk about the radio. The radio is good if you have to announce something quickly. If you're doing a special, we're going to talk about promotion events here in a couple pages. If you have a special guest or a special promotion that just happens to come up real quick, radio is a good way to get it out into the streets. 327. Now here's what everybody's probably thinking about. Well, use a website. There are advantages to websites. For example, the website interactivity, detailed information. Websites are available 24/7. But we're going to come back to that. 24/7, and it's relatively inexpensive to run a website. The problem is, as a shopper, and tell me you haven't done this, gone to your favorite store, started clicking buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this, and then you hit checkout, and your total comes out to like $13 trillion billion. What's it so easy to do? You click and you empty your cart. So that $13 trillion billion in sales just went right out in the click of a button. So there's a problem with websites, so keep that in mind. Starting on page 327, we talk about promotional advertising, institutional advertising. These are just different types of advertising. Combination of advertising. On 328, we talk about cooperative advertising. The principle involves the sharing of the cost of the ad between the manufacturer and the retailer. You're probably seeing more and more of this, which is a good thing. That shared cost will always help out. So don't think that's not a bad thing. We talk about special events on 329. Fashion shows. We want to talk about fashion shows for just a second. We talk about the runway shows. We talk about informal modeling over on page 331. Is it less expensive to go out and hire a big name model, or just use some of your own employees, dress them up in whatever fashion you're trying, or apparel that you're trying to promote, and have them walk around the store? They would love to do it. They're less expensive than a big name model, and the customers might think them more approachable than your big name models. So just something to think about. Again, and I hate to stress it, but this chapter more than most we're going to talk about costs. Remember, advertising gets a whole lot more money than visual merchandising, except the big name stores like Macy's. Trunk shows, cosmetic demonstrations, holiday parades, etc., etc. 332, talk about special sales. 330, product sampling is a great way to introduce your line. A new color, something that will motivate a future purchase, especially around Christmas time. So don't let that just slip through their fingers. Cooking demonstrations. Now, we get down to 333. Remember the old saying, any publicity is good publicity. Don't know that I go along with that every time, but most times I would agree to that. Free publicity, if I can get something free in the newspaper, get an article written about me, something like that. Now, my comment would be, what about BP? A few years ago, they had that big oil spill. They had all the publicity they wanted, but was it good publicity? Is there such a thing as bad publicity? Something to think about. There's on page 334, take a couple minutes and read that profile about Macy's. I know we've talked about Macy's probably just about every week, but they're the big boy. Read that article or the little profile. It's a good little profile on them. And then we wrap it up on 334 and 335 about promotional campaigns. They do pay off. They do pay off, but they are costly at the same time. And that takes us back to page 336 where we started. Guys, again, please look over those key points of the chapter. And that covers the text, the chapters that we're going to cover anyways. All right. Hope you get through this chapter. It's a good chapter. It's starting to wrap things up. It's tucking in the corners. It's dotting the I's and crossing the T's. All right.